Hello! When we think about the new Negro of the 1920s, we think about their literature, music, and art. Many of us wonder, where did the artistic inspiration of African Americans came from? That's why I decided to make an inquiry about what factors of the Harlem Renaissance provided a new form of identity to African Americans in the 1920s. We usually just jump into conclusions about their inspiration, but we never really investigate in depth how did the African Americans make so beautiful masterminds of work, and why were the 1920s the perfect time for their flourishment. As you can see in the pictures, that the music by jazz and blues was so important for us today, and the literature they make by poems or novels. Now, to start with the context of the African Americans in this decade, I have to first start talking about their mass movement to the north and how important their education was for them. Since they were free from slavery, they started looking for ways to teach their people knowledge, and this knowledge acquired by them made them build up their refinement, their quantity of money. This refinement and quantity of money impulsed them to attempt a new identity by avoiding stereotypes in the start of the 1900s by the writing of Booker T. Washington, A New Negro for a New Century. Washington and other writers tried to change the image of African Americans by picturing them as abolitionists like Frederick Douglass as an example, as soldiers of the Civil War and even in World War I, great artists, and even made labor movements, organizations like the NAACP that was seeking more equality and better conditions in their work. Through my research, I discovered that the Harlem Renaissance had many unique characteristics that made African Americans feel beautiful, or as the New Vogue, as they were called back then. Harlem, and many other black communities in northern cities, were considered as African American promised lands. As you can see in the picture about Harlem, it was the first time in history that so many African Americans lived together in a similar place. By living together, they shared many stories, which were usually about the burdens they carried with them to the north. These stories were about slavery that they had back in some years before, poverty that they faced after being free from slavery, violence that was about when they were in slavery, as you can see in that picture of that man that was beaten when he was a slave, and racial discrimination. African Americans used these burdens that they had in common to express themselves through literature, either by poems or novels, musicals, with jazz music of, for example, of Louis Armstrong, as you can hear in the background, blues music, and many famous paintings as the one you saw at the beginning of the presentation. Let's hear my inquiry again. What factors of the Harlem Renaissance provided a new form of identity to African Americans in the 1920s? To answer this question, I just have to say that factors from the Harlem Renaissance that provided a new form of identity to African Americans in the 1920s simply were that Harlem and other African American communities were seen as promised lands. Second, that mass immigration increased the intercommunication of African Americans that share many emotions and feelings from the horrible past as they live as slaves. Also, living in the North gave them a new perspective of opportunities to modernizing and making money by having more similar opportunities like the ones of white people. This was the big factors that allowed so beautiful works that they made in the 1920s. To conclude my investigation, I have to say that communities with a big number of African American residents, like Harlem, made the flourishing of artistic inspiration possible in this ethnicity. Living with many other African Americans that shared the same past from the South made it easy for them to express their feelings through literature, paintings, and music, and many other ways of art. This revalued the image of African Americans and made them popular. I advise all these new generations of people to not only see the appearances of any piece of work that is representative of history. It's amazing how surprised you can be when looking for the context and the causes of the people who make popular works. I think it is very important to understand what these artists were feeling and thinking that inspired them so much at doing their work. Thank you, and this is my bibliography.